We're going to continue our discussion talking about the formation and ripening of fruit. The formation of fruits is generally triggered when the flower is pollinated and fertilization occurs. Ripening is when the ovary begins to grow larger and become a fruit. So let's look at the various types of fruit. Simple fruits are fruits that come from one flower that has one pistil. So a simple fruit, one flower, one pistil. An aggregate fruit comes from one flower but multiple pistils. A multiple fruit comes from multiple flowers. So one of the more common types of simple fruits is called a berry. A berry occurs when the entire ovary is fleshy and juicy. A drupe is fleshy and juicy, but not throughout, and there's an inner woody center. An example of that is a peach plant, which has this inner woody part, and inside the woody part is where the seed is. The third is called a pome, P-O-M-E, which is fleshy and juicy, but not throughout. And it has a papery core as opposed to a woody core. And a good example of that is an apple with this papery core. Inside is the seed, and then you have the fleshy or juicy part out here. Legumes are pods that contain multiple seeds. An example of a legume is a pea plant. Samaras are a single dry seed with a wing. And here's an example of a samara. And you've probably seen these. I think oak trees have samaras. And a nut is a single seed enclosed with a hard covering. And these are acorns. They're examples of nuts. Now, an achene is very similar to a nut. And the only difference between an achene and a nut is the thickness and toughness of the shell. An achene has a much less tough shell than a standard nut. These are sunflower seeds, which have achenes, but these are very easily cracked with your fingers, whereas a lot of nuts you cannot crack the nut with your fingers. And then grains are kernels of food, and it's kind of interesting because each kernel, so each of these rice kernels is actually a complete fruit. So simple fleshy fruits are one category, and they are berries, drupes, and pomes. Berries, drupes being represented by either a cherry or a peach, and then pomes, which is primarily represented by a apple, but also a pear. Simple dry fruits, legumes, samaras, nuts, and grains, and then achenes. Now let's look at a couple examples of aggregate fruits. Remember, an aggregate fruit is a single flower with multiple pistils, and a multiple fruit is multiple flowers. So an aggregate fruit, an example would be shown here, a strawberry. Blackberries, raspberries, and then strawberries. Multiple fruits have several flowers. The example is a pineapple. So wheat and grains in general are very, very important because they're one of the most important sources of food for animals and humans. The outer part is called the husk, and it has absolutely no value. This is what is referred to in the Bible as chaff. And when you see people throwing grain up in the air, what they're doing is letting the wind blow the chaff or husk away. Inside the husk is called the bran. Now the bran is primarily fiber. The endosperm is this starchy material that provides energy for the seed and the developing embryo. And then lastly, the germ is the developing embryo. So when you buy a jar of wheat germ, what you're buying is a jar of wheat embryos. Enriched flour is flour that has vitamins and minerals added to it, because vitamins and minerals can be lost during the processing of the grain. Now, the primary function of fruits is to scatter the seeds. The seeds need to be scattered and viable when they're scattered so that they can germinate. There are two kinds of dispersal. There's agent dispersal, which means an outside agent carries the seed. Example of this is shown here. These sunflower or dandelion seeds, when they break off, they are carried by the wind, and the wind is the agent or outside agent. Animals eat fruits, and the animal is the dispersal agent, and they poop out the seed and spread the seed that way. The other way is a mechanical dispersal, when the actual fruit bursts open and seeds are expelled from inside the fruit. The seed structure is shown here. Remember that the seed is an embryo plant, and remember I told you that I tell you what monocot and dicot is. These are seed leaves or cotyledons, and this one has two, and so it's a dicot. The future shoot, which is shown right here, is called the plumule, and the future root, shown here, is called the radicle. And as I said, these leaves, these large starchy sections that provide energy, they're called cotyledons. Here's another diagram. Here's the parts again restated. But then there's also something called the endosperm, which is the part of the seed which acts as food storage for the developing plant embryo. It usually contains starch with proteins and other nutrients. So in addition, this is the cotyledon is the endosperm, and then you have the embryo here with the future root or radicle, and then the plumules here, which is the future stem. Now this seed shows the coat, the seed coat, and the seed coat is a protective covering over the seed. And there's a structure here called the hilum, and the hilum is a scar where the seed was attached to the ovary wall before it was released. Germination is the sprouting of a seed to produce a plant. Now seeds go through a period of dormancy, and dormancy is a period of inactivity, and this prevents the seed from germinating in unfavorable conditions. In other words, you want the seed to begin to grow the plant when the plant can actually survive. So if it's like 12 below zero outside, you don't want the germination to occur because the plant will die. And so dormancy is that period that prevents seeds from germinating at the wrong time. And the stored food in the cotyledons is there for when germination occurs and provides the energy in the form of a starch. Now seed banks are storage areas where seeds are kept, and actually people can go and buy seeds from a seed bank. And so a seed bank is a storage facility that houses seeds at specific temperature and humidity, and it preserves them and keeps them for their genetic information. Now the question here is, why must a seed be stored at a low temperature under carefully controlled conditions? If you think about it, if you don't do that, then the seeds will germinate and die. And so seed banks keep the environment very controlled to prevent that from happening.